Okay, welcome to the Saturday night LaRouche Pack class series. This week we're going to begin a five-part series, which is based on a video lecture series that Lyndon LaRouche produced 40 years ago for his 1984 presidential campaign. It's a class called The Power of Labor. And in it, LaRouche presents the basic principles of his science of physical economy. The way we'll proceed is we'll show a section each week of for the next 5 weeks, and it will be accompanied by supplementary presentations and question and answer periods on the material. So I want to begin that tonight, but let me just set the stage because I think it is quite appropriate, especially for some of our viewers who may not be quite cognizant or aware of what the world was like in 1984, and you'll see why this is so relevant for today. LaRouche was running in 84 in his third run for the US presidency, and in the 84 presidential campaign was occurring, first of all, after President Ronald Reagan had adopted LaRouche's proposal for the Strategic Defense Initiative, which LaRouche saw not as a military doctrine or strategic matter per se, but as a part of a whole science driver program to reorient the US and ultimately the world economy towards advanced technological development, as was the orientation, for example, in the Kennedy years with the Apollo project. And accompanied the SDI program, LaRouche also was calling for a colonization of the moon and Mars, that this would be accompanied it. The opposition to this at the time came from the Soviet Union, the British Empire, and the Democratic Party in the United States, which was hell-bent on stopping the SDI, and were in the process of imposing what today we call a Green New Deal. Back then, it was just basically environmentalism, but we were shutting down nuclear plants in the United States. We can go into details in the question and answer period, but there were a lot of similarities to the kind of situation which was today. And their intention, of course, was to oust Ronald Reagan from the presidency and either put in a Democrat or his vice president, George H.W. Bush, who was loyal to the British Empire and an opponent of LaRouche. Now, Reagan personally was very much committed to the kind of outlook that LaRouche was organizing for, at least in the question of technology and science. But within the Reagan administration, and in the general population, there was a real lack of understanding of basic economic principles. And the prevailing economic dogma was the same deregulation and free trade policies, which were initiated initially under Carter and to some degree under Nixon. And were very similar to what today we're facing with the question of globalization, financialization, and so forth. This was sort of the beginning of that period. So there's a lot of similarities in terms of the political and economic conditions that we're facing today. And LaRouche presented this tape as part of his presidential campaign to both educate the American population, but also policymakers on the basic principles of economics that they were either completely unaware of or opposed to try and influence the Reagan administration. So today we're faced with, as I say, a very somewhat similar situation, although much has changed and you can't draw direct analogies. But what you can say is that these basic principles that LaRouche lays out in this tape, in this presentation he made, are very valid today and really have the same importance that they did 40 years ago, which is that these are the basic principles of economics that the population, the American citizenry, and the incoming Trump administration really have to understand and adopt to deal with the crisis that we're currently facing. So as part of this effort, we've reproduced a version of a copy of this tape. You'll notice the quality might be a little bit different than today's standards, but it's perfectly good copy. And I want you to watch it, and then afterwards we will have and think about these principles and how they apply today, because it comes directly from LaRouche. And then afterwards we can have Q&A and any supplementary discussions that come up. So why don't we just begin with the tape? Tony, you want to start?
Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. During this program, travel deep into the innermost thoughts of the man whom Russia's rulers have said they fear the most. He is one of the most controversial international public figures of the decade, chief executive for an international news agency, and hated by powerful international financial circles for his 10-year campaign for international monetary reform. His fundamental discoveries in economic science have made him the world's most successful economic forecaster.
Although perhaps few of you know this today, it was during the Golden Renaissance in Italy that Western European civilization first received the new conceptions, which in due course led to the establishment of our constitutional republic in the United States. Two men of 15th century Italy stand out above all others. The first and greatest of these men of Italy, was a German by birth, Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa. The greatest giant among Cusa's immediate successors was Leonardo da Vinci. In science, no one approximately matches the genius and breadth of Leonardo's contributions, but that universal genius, Gottfried Leibniz. After Leibniz, among men of science, only Carl Gauss is to be compared with these two. The strange thing is that most of you have at least some vague idea of Leonardo's importance, but most of you perhaps know nothing about Leonardo's great immediate predecessor, a man who was undoubtedly the greatest genius, the most universal and profound mind of the past 600 years, and the one man to whom modern European culture is more indebted than any single other personality, Nicholas of Cusa. In science, taking into account the full scope of Leonardo's scientific genius, the entirety of modern European science could not have developed but for the work of Cusa in establishing the foundations of a rigorous scientific method of discovery in writings such as Cusa's great De Docta Ignorantia. Even few leading scientists of the 20th century know much at all about Cousé's work, although modern science could not exist today without continued dependence upon Cousé's fundamental discoveries in mathematics. We're indebted to Cousé for many other things. For example, it was Cousé who defined the doctrine of international law governing the existence of the modern form of sovereign nation-state republic. It was Cousé who established the doctrine of natural law, as the founding fathers of our constitutional republic knew of natural law. Although Cousé perfected the preceding work on these matters by St. Augustine, by Dante Alighieri, and by Petrarca, it was the direct influence of Cousé which led to the founding of the first of the modern sovereign nation-states by France's King Louis XI during the 15th century, and the establishment of the second modern nation-state, Tudor England, not long afterward. Despite the numerous contributions to mankind made by ancient civilizations earlier, the rate of scientific, technological, economic, and political progress affected in Europe and the Americas over the 400 years from the beginning of the middle of the 15th century through the middle of the 19th century has been equaled nowhere in the history of mankind. Yet, despite the miraculous contributions of the 15th century's Golden Renaissance, these contributions were essentially nothing but an unleashing of a very special kind of potentiality embedded in Judeo-Christian Western civilization from the time of Jesus Christ. Although these are fundamental differences between a civilization based on the law of Moses and what the New Testament defines as the new dispensation of Christ, Christianity and Judaism have a common basis, a basis rooted in the opening chapter of the book of Genesis. Implicitly, the secret of everything is embedded in the commandment given to mankind in that great 28th verse from the first chapter of Genesis. In the remainder of this broadcast, many of you will discover for the first time some of the profound wisdom in that verse from the book of Genesis. You will recognize rather easily by the close of our broadcast that there's a very profound truth in that verse. And if you were astonished by that, you will perhaps be even more astonished at the simplicity which the point we present here is proven. I am persuaded by both knowledge and by experience that what you shall learn in the remaining hour or so of this broadcast will greatly enrich your life.
The following program is one of 5 parts of The Power of Labor, an educational special on economic science written by Democratic presidential candidate Lyndon LaRouche. The Power of Labor was produced for classroom use and is intended to be accompanied by Mr. LaRouche's textbook, So You Wish to Learn All About Economics.
What we're going to do in this broadcast is to make you a master of the ABCs of economic science, starting from verse 28, chapter 1 of the book of Genesis. Let us begin with the first clause in that verse. What does it mean to be fruitful? In other words, how can we as citizens judge whether or not the United States as a nation is being fruitful or unfruitful, in the sense that that verse implies? Let us turn our attention to another verse in the same book of Genesis, chapter 3, verse 19. You know it very well. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground. For out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. Let us simply combine the commandment, be fruitful, with this second verse. By combining the two verses, we have in our hands the first fundamental statement in economic science. The first measurement of the degree of fruitfulness of a nation such as the United States is best described by a term which may sound frightening to some of you at first hearing. After I've explained what this term means step by step, it should no longer appear to be complicated and confusing. To help you at this point, I shall write the term on your television screen: potential relative population density. Let us take that complicated sounding phrase apart, piece by piece, and remove the mystery. Population density means, first of all, the average number of persons dwelling on an average square mile or square kilometer of habitable land area. Economic science begins by interpreting the term population density in a very special way. Assume that a society inhabiting a certain land area is supported by nothing but the fruit of that society's own labor. How many people can be sustained by the amount of that labor applied to an average square kilometer of that land area? A little discussion of this may be needed at this point. The most primitive form of human life we know is what the anthropologists have named a hunting and gathering form of social existence. In this form of society, mankind has only a few very simple tools. The best estimate of the population density of mankind in such a level of technology is that about 10 or more square kilometers are needed to support the life of an average individual with the fruit of human food gathering and related labor. This is a population density of about 1/10 per square kilometer, or not more than 10 million people living on this planet at one time. Those poor primitive ancestors of ours lived a pretty miserable sort of existence. The average life expectancy was way below 20 years of age. It was a society whose population must have consisted mostly of pre-adolescent children. Their conditions of life in many ways were worse than those of troops of faster and stronger baboons. It was the kind of paradise to which some of our radical ecologists have been demanding we all return as soon as possible. Today, the world's population is estimated to be more than 4.5 billion persons. You see how the population has grown during the recent 400 years? Look at the estimates on your chart now on your screen. Through various stages of technological progress, our population is more than 450 times the level possible for primitive mankind. Under conditions made possible by modern technology, many persons can expect to live to more than 70 years of age. The potential population density has increased by more than 450 times. We can restate this another way. The productive powers of labor have been increased by more than 450 times. This increase has been the result of successive technological revolutions. First, there was the development of fishing near the mouths of major rivers. Out of this came the development of simple water vehicles and the beginnings of simple urban settlements based on fishing. Out of this came the development of simple agriculture. Agriculture developed best in settlements near the mouths of important rivers and spread upriver. There were revolutions in the development of materials and tools. There was the use of animal power, water power, and wind power to supplement the muscles of human labor. Then, beginning the end of the 17th century in Europe, there was the revolution based on burning of coal to produce heat to power machines. Out of this came chemistry, and later the use of electrical power. These successive technological revolutions are the key to the increase of productive powers of labor, the increase we see in population density. This is the first rough measure of man's obedience to the commandment of Genesis to be fruitful. Now let us look at relative population density. Not every part of the land we inhabit is equally suitable. Given the same quality of technology, the amount we can produce from some land is less than we can produce on other land. This means we cannot treat each and every square kilometer of land as representing the same rate of potential population density. The quality of this land is not permanently fixed. We improve the land. We also deplete those improvements. The case of the Imperial Valley in California is an example. Desert land was transformed into some of the most valuable agricultural land in the world. If that land in the Imperial Valley were not maintained, it would revert to very poor land. This brings us to potential relative population density. This should be pretty obvious. To determine how fruitful society has become, it is not enough to know what the present relative population density is. We must discover what the relative potential population density potentially could be at the given level of technology. Therefore, we must measure the potential relative population density. This measurement becomes our approximate measurement of the fruitfulness of society. This is the approximate measure of the productive powers of labor. So far, we have stated simply what most adults used to believe in the United States. Our nation was founded by people who believed in the advantages and necessity for technological progress. We declared our independence from Britain and fought wars against Britain to obtain and defend that independence. The most immediate issue of those wars against Britain was that our founding fathers refused to accept the attempts of the British East India Company and of Adam Smith to suppress technological progress in the English colonies in North America. Until near the end of the 1960s and the beginning of the 1970s, that belief was part of our national culture and was national policy. Is continued technological progress still necessary? In other words, can we as a society be fruitful, as the book of Genesis commands us to be, if we were to halt technological progress at the present level? Even the radical ecologists, such as Dennis Meadows and Jay Forrester, who wrote the book The Limits to Growth, admit that if we halted technological progress, our society would collapse through depletion of some vital classes of raw materials. Let us look at this problem of depletion of raw materials for a moment. The production of every material need of populations begins with the production of raw materials through agriculture and mining. For this purpose, we define the word agriculture broadly to include things such as fishing and forestry. The production of raw materials depends upon what we call natural resources. Let us look at this a bit more closely. As natural resources become poorer through depletion, or as we must travel further to obtain natural resources needed for raw materials production, the average amount of labor required to produce any fixed amount of a certain quality of raw materials increases. The cost of production of everything increases. Therefore, the average amount produced per person decreases. In other words, the productive powers of labor are decreased. The potential relative population density for the society as a whole falls. If this depletion continues, sooner or later, the potential population must fall below the level of the existing population. Then the society collapses. Such effects as famine and epidemic disease. It can never recover from such a collapse unless there is an advance in technology. Improvements in technology overcome the problems of depletion in two ways. First, by increasing the productive powers of labor, so that the average labor produces more output with the same human effort. Secondly, technological revolutions redefine in a fundamental way at least part of the spectrum of natural resources which mankind may employ efficiently. Without endless technological progress, society is doomed sooner or later. One of the unavoidable byproducts of technological progress is that the division of labor in production becomes increasingly complex. As a result, the size of the population must be increased. This means that the precondition for survival of society is an endless increase in the potential relative population density. Therefore, we must refine the definition of what it means to fulfill the commandment of Genesis. Mankind's behavior is not fruitful unless mankind is increasing the relative potential population density. Therefore, what we must measure is not simply potential relative population density. What we must measure is the increase of potential relative population density. In other words, the man who labors in the exact same manner as his father, his grandfather, and so forth before him, is not being fruitful in the way Genesis requires of society. It is technological progress which makes mankind fruitful. It is changing our behavior in the way scientific progress implies, which makes our labor fruitful. The increase of potential relative population density, which expresses the fruitfulness of mankind, reflects in us a special quality which no creature but mankind possesses. No species of animal could willfully increase its potential relative population density by even 2 or 3 times, to say nothing of 450-fold. No variety of beast has the power to modify its behavior in this way. Man's power to discover the laws of the universe ever more perfectly and to assimilate that improved knowledge in the form of technological progress is a special quality of mankind, the quality properly associated with the name of the human soul. The commandment of Genesis is a command that we conduct our lives in such a way that we oblige ourselves to call from within us those special powers which separate men from beasts. In order to survive as mankind, we must base our mental life upon the development, the perfection of those potentialities for scientific progress which distinguish us from the mere beasts. Unless we sustain technological progress in that way, our society becomes unfit to survive. If we continue to fail in that way, our society will surely not survive. Therefore, we repeat, mankind is fruitful only to the degree that mankind increases the potential relative population density of society. This increase cannot occur except through technological progress. That technological progress cannot occur except as we perfect those creative mental powers through which we produce and assimilate the fruits of scientific progress. These creative mental powers, properly understood, are the essential primary subject matter of economic science. Before turning our attention to the mathematically comprehensible connection between well-defined creative mental activity and scientific progress, we must describe the way in which the individual member of society contributes to increasing the potential relative population density of his or her entire society in both the present and in the future.
Okay, so that's the first part, which in seeing it again, it strikes me how relevant it is to our situation today as being a crucial principle that must be understood. So I'd like to open it up for questions so people can raise their hand